and we have a big market, and we have also some offtake agreement with some of the government and big company like SABIC and Aramco, and they have a program for a local demand and the localization, which is Nusanid in SABIC and Iktifa in Aramco. Now we will highlight some of the enablers, which is in mining, okay? In mining, this is what I say. This is the big map, and see how many resources, natural resources we are having, and we could create a big industry of mining. If you look for gold or iron or zinc or copper, you are talking about hundreds of billions are there. And also if you see some resources like silica is abundant. And phosphate, which is, I think, India, and they are much interested in phosphate. It's a big opportunity in Saudi Arabia. So this is with $120 billion of investment in mining, we could realize this 1.3 trillion. Now in industry, this is really, there is a big opportunity because there is around 12 sectors, including renewable energy, including medical supplies, including automotive, chemicals, machinery and equipment, and food processing and aquaculture. At the top of that, pharma, and I think this is again another area of interest for India, because pharma is, India, they have a good infrastructure and research and capability that we could synergize together. Of course, this sector, it's over more than $300 billion opportunity for investment. And this is only a quick overview on this. For logistics, I think Saudi Arabia, it has a unique location, and it has a good connectivity with India, with Africa, and also with Europe. And with this, we could capitalize on this now. Because of that, our government, they are investing around $35 billion to improve our infrastructure. And really, there is around 2,000 kilometers of railway to connect east with west. And by the way, this will be part of One Belt, One Road initiative with China. So this will give you a very good infrastructure of logistics that would help you. And again, in airport, and also in roadway, and also in improving the seaports, we are working heavily on those with heavy investment. And by the way, in the logistics, Saudi Arabia recently, we managed to reduce the container waiting days in port from 14 days to 6 days, which is a reduction more than 50%. In port documentation, usually it is 12. We reduce it to 2, which is a big reduction. And also reduction of export from 8 documents to 2 documents. And this is a clear indication of how efficient Saudi Arabia is working in our supply chain and in our logistics, which is, again, in India Vision 2022, you are looking to reduce your logistic cost from 14% of the GDP to less than 10%. With this, he starts saying time. Energy, last sector, okay. I think energy, we start with initial vision and numbers, which is around 9.5, then they revise it to 27.3, and after that it was revised to 58.7, and the time span was increased from 5 years to 12 years. This will enable the renewable energy production facility to come, and we create a big market that would work fine for KSA. Enablers, I think I talk about it in general, and it's including human capital, local demand, policy, everything. And with this, I would like to say thank you, and sorry because I exceed my time. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Hareti. I think it's a very useful presentation to understand what is NIDPL is all about. And I think it's a very right opportunity and right time that NIDPL is mandated to transform KSA as one of the leading countries in the logistic and infrastructure sector, promising the economic development and also generating 1.3 million jobs over the time. So thank you so very much for your time and presentation, all this. So our next speaker is Mr. Nizar Al-Hariri. He's got 25 years of experience in the business development, both for governments and private sectors. In the morning, I got to know about his immense contribution towards the pharma sector as well. So Mr. Hariri, over to you, please.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this morning to see our presentation, and thank you for Engineer Awaid Al-Harthi for giving us an excellent overview about the NIDLIB program. My presentation will be shorter, I promise you, and it will go quickly on time. Basically, just to give you an overview about the industrial clusters, we have been established in 2008. And basically, we are the Ministry of Energy and Industry, Business Developers, Enablers, and Industrial Governance. That's what we do for the ministry and the country. And IC, as a strategy implementer under one of the entities that working under NIDLIB, NIDLIB is actually overviewing 34 entities, and we are one of them. And we see ourselves like the 3I strategy as accelerator and a new industrial phase for Saudi Arabia. So the first I, we see our industrial clustering, and we have 12 clusters to take care of under the Vision 2030. We also see ourselves as an industrial enabler of identifying and developing incentives and enabling human development, trade policy. We look into industrial sector policies. We look into investment incentives and work with the client day by day to enhance it. The 3I, also we see ourselves as an industrial empowerment. So we look into unlocking the KSA industrial advantages in terms of capital, energy feedstock pricing, defining champions, and we actually work sometimes in a voice of the client. The services we provide under our capacity is we look into the governance, the policy enabling, industry strategy implementing. We provide advisory for the private and the public sector. We have our own business intelligence, and we do industrial value chain analysis. We also do economic analysis and business development as something that we actually proud of. Our business model is actually straightforward. It's basically we identify the industrial opportunity. We look into to promote that business opportunity within the community. We then target specific investors, high caliber investors to support them, and then execute that industrial investment from MOUs to term sheets to contracts up to it looks to its manifesting and taking place. And then we also do the aftercare. So if the client or our investor is facing any problem, we can always take care of him and look into the different government entities to work with him toward a safe journey in his investment. At the moment, and under the capacity of the vision, we have the following clusters. Those are existing at the moment in terms of human capital and under development, like the automotive, the pharma, the medical devices, and the metals, basic chemistry, specialty chemistry, and plastics. The new ones coming in 2019 and 2020 is in aerospace, machinery equipment, building materials, food processing, and renewables. Just to zoom in, giving the market opportunities that we have in automotive, chemicals, plastic, pharma, medical devices, and metals, the ones that are existing, we're going to zoom in also into pharma. It's one of my favorites, and also we have some success stories that we would like to share them with you today, especially in India. You can see that the country at the moment is having the following 6 major segments. We're talking about the oral solids, OCDs, which is basically, when you look at it, so almost 50% of our market is dominating by this sector. We have, as we go to the right side of the slide, You can see the more, if I can say, strategic and more sophisticated pharmaceutical industries, with this 50% of our bill, but actually the most growing is the biologics and biosimilars, and that's the focus areas as we go to the right side of the slide. If we go in another deep dive, we can see that 40% of our brands today in Saudi Arabia can actually be localized. When we look into the Indian model, we can see that a lot of generics today has been actually taking place of the branded drugs, and this is the model that actually the world is trying to follow with India, and it's one of our favorites. In Saudi Arabia, we have this opportunity today to actually push this blue, dark blue column to this side and move toward the Indian model to localize. So this is a very big opportunity today in Saudi Arabia with Indian companies. This is part of the success stories we have with India since I started with them in 2005. We have a foreign direct investment from Arbendo. Today in the morning, we were discussing with Glenmark the localization of their respiratory inhalers between a foreign direct investment and a JV. Dishman also came with a JV on an APIs, and Dr. already invested in oncology drugs since 3 years ago in joint ventures and technology transfer with Saudi companies. Just very quickly, I think my colleague, the engineer Awayed, have went through the enhanced, if I can say the enablers, but I'm just going to go quickly to the top 4 of them. So today we have an offtake agreement existing, which we call a 2+1. So you take an award of 2 years plus 1 that can be actually negotiated. And as we speak this year in 2019, we're talking about to increase it to 5. So it's 4+1 or 6+1. And this is under negotiating right now. We have a fast track registration for those drugs that have a they have a US FDA and an EMA that can be registered in 30 days. So if it's only having one of them, either one of them, they can actually be registered in 60 days. For export enablement, this is actually the exempt export bank that can actually reduce risk for companies that want to export to areas of conflict, and this is a very useful tool that I can talk about after the presentation if someone is interested to know more about it. And also this year, the Saudi Industrial Development Fund have increased their capital, and for pharma, especially in the strategic areas, they can go up to 75% loan and over 20 years of repayment. Those are I call them my champions. They're here today with us. We have more than 7 of our experts along with us in this visit. You can have this presentation. It's available with the team, and you can actually meet me or meet them outside in the sectorial rooms to discuss about their business opportunities. Thank you very much for your wise listening.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Hariri. And I think it's a very useful program to promote the new industries which are growing in KSA and also helping them in diversifying to the target industry clusters, which can optimally use the natural resources the country has. So we have just basically less than 2 minutes now, so I'll just take one question each. So I'll start with Mr. Hariti. Sir, you have talked about this NIDPL, the various initiatives undertaken by the government. So just want to understand where this particular program is at this point of time. And importantly, what are the various improvements that this program is focusing on transportation and logistic improvement in the country?
Okay. Well, it's clear Saudi Arabia is having a great infrastructure as of now. And simply Midlib, he replicate the same strategy which is used by Saudi Arabia when they developed gas and oil industry in the late 70s, early 80s. And just now we consider different sectors in the industry that has a potential and it has a strategic depth for Saudi Arabia to ensure those industry would be a sustainable industry. And now government is investing heavily to develop the infrastructure of port, railway, roads, and everything. And also they are investing heavily to modify our education system to produce new human capital that would run this industry and build those local industry. Also, there is some financial support, and also the SIDF scope was increased and the fund was increased to 28 billion. And also to support Saudi export and import, there is a bank established with $8 billion fund. So all of these are clear efforts and support by government to make our environment is so attractive for the investors, and establishing economy zone and a special industrial city. This will enable such industry in 12 sectors that we mentioned so far.
Fantastic. I think KSA is ready to go for the investments. So question to Mr. Nizar, that we have seen in India also for the clusters-led development, many initiatives have been taken both on the regulatory as well as on the enablement of various input costs. I need to understand, and for the larger investors community here, what is the status of trunk infrastructure? Basically the road, rail, power to these particular clusters, and what is the status of land acquisition as well?
Well, when you look at the NIDLIP program that Mr. Awayel just explained, you can see that the government today is actually putting all these areas of interest for the investors under one umbrella. And that's why it's taking care of industry, it's taking care of the development of the logistics and enhancement and enabling of all. Today in Saudi Arabia, we have more than 40 industrial cities, 35 with Mudun, and the rest is with the Royal Commission, and there is also the King Abdullah Economic City, which I saw some of my colleagues representing today. And all these cities actually are very sophisticated. They have the right infrastructure in terms of utilities, roads, and today there is a very big plan to connect them also with rail. And some of them already have that, like Sudair and Ras Al Khair, already connected with rail. And most of these cities are actually 1 hour in distance between airports to them. So fairly, they're actually very good, and we actually encourage investors in India and also around the world to come and visit them and see them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nizar. So as a concluding remark, I would say that these two programs are in line with think global at local, which is very important. So basically moving the industries from the global world and also providing lots of investment and the job opportunities to the local industry, which is very relevant. And this is the need of the hour. Second aspect, which I have seen, and I think everybody would concur on my views also, that with the global scenario changing both on the economy as well as the business models are changing with artificial intelligence and other digital things are coming up. Both these programs have focused on the innovation. And this is very important because as a youth, and both the speakers have talked about the demographic dividend the KSA has. So if we have youth which is proactive, which is progressive, which is forward-looking, and we have plans which are promoting the innovation and also the startup entrepreneur mindshare. I think this is the right time for KSA to think about it. And as investors, both from the Indian as well as the global industry, this is the right time. And I think these two programs are very aptly designed in terms of promoting both local entrepreneurship and also getting the foreign investments. So we initially thought of taking a couple of questions from the floor also, but we have our panel members and Mr. Premji is also here, so we have a paucity of time. But both these speakers are available throughout the day. I'll encourage each of you to have a meaningful conversation with these two people and also see how as an Indian investors, how as Indian policy makers, we can take lots of cue from having these kind of a large programs which can transform industry, which have transformed economy from the one sector led to the diversified sector economy. Thank you so very much. And my thanks to all the organizers here, and all the best for the success of two programs. May I request each of you to have a round of applause for both our speakers.
We thank the moderator, Mr. Adil Zaidi, partner and leader in Ernst & Young, for conducting that session on showcasing industry in Saudi Arabia. Our next session is on future forward opportunities, investments and partnership opportunities in future forward promising sectors for KSA and India. I'd like to invite on the dais Mr. Yusuf Al Benyan, CEO of the Saudi Arabian Basic Industries Corporation, Mr. Amin Al Nasser, CEO, Saudi Aramco, Mr. Sanjeev Singh, Chairman, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, Mr. Azim H. Premji, Chairman, Wipro, and the moderator for this session, Mr. Vikas Kaushal, partner at A.T. Kearney, will take over this session.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well? Thank God. It's a great privilege being here moderating this elite panel. I must start off by saying this is a panel which is high on energy and high on technology. I'll explain why I said that. The panelists here represent organizations which are pioneering in the sectors in their work, not only in their own geographies, but globally. They have all made global impact. They're also working in the cutting edge of technology and most importantly on harnessing human capital. And it'll be great to hear the view of all the eminent panelists out here. Just to give the context and a few data points to start off with, Dr. Faisal mentioned about the trade between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and India. If I look at the imports into India, we import roughly about $20 billion from KSA. And if you look at non-hydrocarbon imports, non-oil related imports, the number drops very dramatically. If you look at exports from India to Saudi Arabia, that's roughly around $5-6 billion, give or take a few millions there. Again, a number not to be very proud of. I'm sure with the vibrant economies both these countries have, the bilateral trade and the investment is something which can be much higher. And that is going to be the focus on this sector, on this session, which we call as Future Forward Sectors. Let me tell you on how I'm going to run the panel. This is an interactive panel. I'll request the panelists to be seated and don't need to come on the dais here, on the stage here. We will start off with 2 or 3 rounds of questions requesting all the panelists to have about 3-4 minutes on each of those questions. In the end, we would take questions from the audience. The team here would circulate some cards, some short cards. Let me show those. So there'll be cards like this. If you have a question, you can write on the question there. If you have a panelist who should take that question, you can put in their name there. And the organizer will send it to me and I'll choose a few questions there. So having set the context, let's get into hearing from the eminent panelists here. I'm going to start off with Mr. Nasir. First of all, a warm welcome to India. Let me start off by asking you a question. You sit on the helm of one of the largest global organizations. You have an opportunity to invest anywhere in the globe there. How is your organization looking at India as an investment destination? And also, how is the larger Saudi business community looking at India as an investment destination?
Thank you, Vikas. I am delighted really to be in India and to participate with my eminent colleagues. Thank you. And to participate in this panel with my eminent colleagues from Saudi Arabia and India. If you look at the global economy, it is going to double in size by 2050. And the power or economic power is shifting from west to east. Actually, out of the 7 largest global economy by 2050, 6 will be from the east. India will be the 2nd largest global economy ahead of the United States. If you look at the growth, economic growth in India, 7% per year. By today, out of the global GDP, India represents 7%. By 2050, India will represent 15% of the global GDP. So that's a very significant growth. If you look at population, India today at 1.4 billion, the population count. By 2050, you're talking about 1.7 billion. More than 65% under the age of 35 years old. A lot of talents, a lot of skill, while developing countries are aging. So this is also an area of strength. Also, India is increasingly becoming more open, more free, business friendly, under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Modi. So all of these are attractive opportunities that present themselves in the Indian market. If I look at it from the oil and gas sector, it is very important. Actually, India is an investment priority for Saudi Aramco. India takes from us almost 800,000 barrels a day. India consumes 4.8 million barrels a day, and by 2040, India total consumption will be around 8.2 million barrels per day. In certain estimates, if you look at 40% of the growth in the oil market, by certain estimates, is going to be here in India. So it is very important for the oil sector. If you look at it for the petrochemical sector, you have almost 5 million barrels per day of refining capacity. My colleague here, Sanjeev, has quite a bit of refining capacity in India. It's the most complex and the highest integration. Actually, certain refineries have the amount of liquid that goes into petrochemical almost 40%. And they are talking about taking almost 60% of that refining feedstock to petrochemicals. So it is an important market in terms of growth. There is, if you look at the number of, out of 1,000 people in India, only 22 own cars. Comparing that to the US, 980, to Europe, 850. So the opportunities and the potential for energy growth with more vehicles on the roads is significant, especially with rising living standards that we are seeing currently in India. In petrochemical, if you look at it, 9 kilogram per capita in India, compared to the US, about 109 kilogram per capita. So as I said, with rising living standard, the potential is huge. And that's why I would say the economy is taking off, and there is a lot of opportunities, and would like to participate with our partners here in India and a lot of the growth that we are seeing.
Thank you, Mr. Nasir. Let me invite Mrs. Singh. First of all, thank you for joining the panel. I'm sure your views would be very helpful here. You lead one of the largest business entities in India. How do you see stronger partnership between the kingdom and India benefit both the countries, and do you see economic synergies?
First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks for inviting me for this panel. It's again wonderful to be with my friend Mr. Amin. I can only second his views, whatever he said about strong ties between India and Saudi Arabia. The ties between the two countries go beyond centuries. It's not only the energy ties strong ties which we see today, but there had been strong cultural and trade ties between the two countries for many, many decades, many, many centuries. And I think that is a strong fundamental of doing business between the two countries. Although energy still remains the major binding force between us, and for mutual reasons. But let me just add to whatever Mr. Amin said about the future growth within India, which I strongly believe is resting on strong fundamentals. While the population is set to grow, there are a lot of things which are linked with population growth. Petrochemical growth or the polymer growth is linked with that. There is a strong energy growth demand, which is bound to happen because of different sectors. Even if we look at oil and gas sector alone, we are a diesel-driven economy, and while the diesel growth, although we have seen some impact of price sensitivity also on the diesel growth, but it is strongly driven by other sectors' growth, and we have seen that. The diesel doesn't change its demand numbers month to month or year to year so easily. When the other sectors are growing, the diesel growth increases, and which we had been seeing. And looking at the future numbers, we see that it's not only that the infrastructure or other sectors are growing and they are bound to grow. Apart from that, the other factors which include, say, environment or things like that, which are going to change the future also. But the bottom line remains that the energy is bound to increase. We are seeing the GDP growth numbers more than 7%. We are seeing a lot of urbanization going to increase. I mean, today close to 33-35% urban population. By 2040, 2045, we expect nearly more than today the energy pattern. But the bottom line remains that the primary energy is bound to increase. The growth is going to come. With Saudi, we have strong ties. We are looking for even stronger ties. Although the energy, in my opinion, the energy will still remain the backbone of the trade relationship between the two countries. But the other sectors, which there might be infrastructure. Infrastructure is a very strong sector. Infrastructure, medical, education, health, things like that, manufacturing. The India is today, the portion of manufacturing sector is close to 16%. By 2040, we expect this to increase to 25%. So there is tremendous opportunity in these sectors also. The one thing which is very strongly in favor of India is the skilled manpower. And I think we can be cost competitive with any other manufacturing nation in the world. So which is a very strong factor which goes in favor of India. And I'm sure that this factor alone offers tremendous opportunities for working together.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Let me move on to and invite Mr. Albanian to this. First of all, welcome to India. Let me talk a bit about your business. As a leading petrochemical player globally, how do you see the industry evolving? And then if you could reflect on what role can Kingdom and India play jointly in the evolving state in the petrochemical industry?
First of all, I just would like to thank the organizer for putting this together. I guess for both of us here from KSA and the rest of the guests, we're full of energy. But I would like really to move away from chemistry and oil and talk about the other part, because we are convinced that doing business in India is very crucial for our global organizations. But today we are commuting to the business community from both sides, India and KSA, to take advantage of these opportunities, to look at the growth opportunities that we can really leverage on both nations. From my side, I think what I can say that both nations are going through a journey of transformation. We have a 2030 vision driven by our Crown Prince, supported by our two holy mosques, King Salman, and in the same time also the Prime Minister Modi are driving transformation vision for India. If you look at the details of those two visions, there is an overlap on some of the key parameters. One of them, creating jobs for our youth. Both are really very crucial. If you look at India, for example, you are talking about rehabbing or reskilling more than 400 people by 2022. This is a great opportunities that we can leverage them in both trade between both nations. If you look at also technology and transformations, technology is a key component of our 2030 vision. If you look at my industry, it's no longer the feedstock is the crucial. Technology and innovations and talent is what matters. So India has a very strong leverage of skilled talent that can help on innovation and transformation. And our 2030 vision also drive for knowledge transfer. And I think that this is a very good complementary role that both India and KSA can play. Then for us as a business community, what matters? If you look at both vision, they have recognized that the private sector is going to be a very crucial and a main enabler for the industry and the economy to transform. Therefore, most of the opportunities that is really given and offered to the private sector to drive this industry. Now, from that perspective, There are so many opportunities. I mean, we have the former speakers, Mr. Al-Harthi and Mr. Al-Hariri, they were talking about business opportunities. And these business opportunities, not only from one side, from both ends. We are trying to attract also Indian investors to the kingdom, but in the same times, we are encouraging our business community in KSA to do business in India. Last year, for example, SABIC, we have more than 39 projects has been approved between both India and also KSA, which could really bring more value to our business community. So there are so many things that we can do together in order for us to leverage this. Finally, I think Mr. Amin al-Nasser has mentioned this clearly. We have huge growth of populations that they are moving from really the suburb to urbanizations. I'll give you an example. By 2025, more than 350 million Indians, they're going to move to smart cities. Just imagine, this is the size of the United States moving from the to the urban side. They're going to demand a middle class and high level of quality, means there is a more demand and more growth for our business community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Banyan. Let me move from the exciting world of energy to even more exciting world of information technology. Mr. Premji, you have been a pioneer in information technology domain and a visionary there. Do you see information technology as a means for enhancing cooperation between KSA and India? Is this also a vehicle for transforming these economies?
Of reading in some depth the Vision 2030 of the country.
If you don't mind, can you take this mic?
How do I get it on?
Okay.
You know, I took the trouble of reading in depth the Vision 2030 of KSA, and three words stood out to me there, you know, which was really fundamental to that vision. One was vibrant, the other was thriving, and the third was ambitious. And all three words fit in beautifully with the IT industry. I mean, it is really the driving force for these kind of initiatives. I think KSA has a unique opportunity of having a low traditional install base of IT. And therefore, it can jumpstart from that into the new IT, which is completely different and transformed from the old IT. Though it serves some of the purposes of the old IT, it has so embedded itself into the organization that it virtually runs the organization. I think this is a very important thing because you've seen this happen in India, where we went from landlines to mobile lines. At a rapid space, you're seeing it how we are getting into internet penetration now. Something like 700,000 Indians are internet penetrated. And you're seeing it in the literacy on the cell phone of the Indians, because they didn't have a tradition of working with a certain system. KSA has a similar tradition. Two is India today has 4 million trained IT professionals. They're seasoned, they're experienced, they're trained and they're retrained by the industry. They bring now today growth rates for the Indian IT industry, which is significantly faster than the global growth rates. So the industry is gaining market share. I say this because it demonstrates that young Indians are qualified, they're trained, they're hungry, and they're willing to learn, which is critical in this industry. Industry in IT, where things are changing so fast, where young people are not willing to learn are dead. Whereas I find even with our people, KSA origin people, Arabian people, working in the Middle East, they're willing to learn, and they're very hungry to learn. Cost of IT talent in India is significantly less than the cost of IT talent globally. That is a major advantage, is because it can be available to IT companies and to organizations and to industry in KSA at reasonable rates. But more important on that, I think there is a higher comfort level of Indians working in Saudi, and there is a higher culture max with people working in Saudi. So it makes for a very comfortable state of affairs vis-a-vis working with Indian companies in Saudi. The Saudi population, 58% is less than 30 years. So it's a wonderful base to retrain people. It's a wonderful base to get young people to be willing to change things. One couldn't ask for a better market vis-a-vis initiatives from India. And I think Indian companies are realizing that. As an example, we employ about 1,200 people in Saudi, out of which more than 55% are local Saudis. We have taken them with some experience. We have taken them majorly from campus and trained them. And we can get them effective. We have the ladies in the Prince Nora Park. We are today at 500 ladies in the Prince Nora Park. And they're completely fresh. And they work better than the men. They're hardworking. They're more devoted. It's a major change in life for them. And we're very happy working with them. So we are now trying to introduce them outside the Prince Nora Park in terms of jobs. I think the universities in Saudi are fairly strong in mathematics and physics, which is really the foundation for IT. And we have had a lot of experience as a company. We work with about 250 universities doing one very simple thing. We upgrade the quality of the engineering teachers. And we find that a better teacher teaches better students. We rework with them to completely upgrade and modernize the engineering curriculum, which again is very relevant. And the same thing can be done by Indian companies. The same thing can be done by Wipro in the Saudi, which can bring a lot of value to Saudi education and engineering, a lot of excitement in Saudi education to engineering, because the excitement in any subject is a function of the teacher. If the teacher is able to bring it to life, many students who would not want to be engineers will turn and look at engineering seriously. As far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Premji. I'm going to come back to you on more views on this later in this. But let me take the benefit of having some of the deepest thinking minds on the energy sector and delve a bit deeper into it. Mr. Nasir, my question to you, how is Saudi Aramco seeing energy transition and what are you doing on it? And from your perspective, what implications could it have for an economy like India?
Well, I think for energy transition, there are certain areas where there is agreements in the industry, in the energy industry in particular, on certain key beliefs. First key belief is that there is a transition that is currently going on in the energy sector. Basically, more electric vehicles, more alternatives are substituting coal, oil, and gas, even though they start from a smaller base, but there is a transition that is ongoing. Second key belief is that the world needs adequate, reliable, and affordable supply of oil and gas or energy. So this is where the consensus ends. In terms of the energy transition, there are two narratives. The first narrative is that energy transition is going to happen within 5 to 10 years. All what you will see in the world is electric vehicles, oil will be stranded, and the level of acceleration on alternatives and renewables is going to be massive, where, as I said, in 5 to 10 years, everything will be stranded. The second narrative, which is what we believe in, is that transition usually takes decades, doesn't happen in 5 to 10 years. It progresses and it accelerates, but the progress and acceleration is slow. And the base where they are starting, you look at today the number of electric vehicles, 5 million, how much they offset from the oil production in 2018 by introducing more electric vehicles, 50,000 barrels of oil, out of 100 million barrels of oil that we supply the market every day. So what we said is the progress is very slow, let alone that most of them are fired by coal-powered plants. But so they are not as clean as claimed. But as I said, the number is very, very small. So we believe that transition is going to be, will take decades. And for us as an industry, energy industry, we need to continue to invest. If we take the first narrative and build based on that, which is 5 to 10 years, nobody is going to invest in exploration. Look at the kingdom, for example, today, 260 billion barrels of oil reserves. Saudi Aramco today, with 260 billion barrels in the kingdom, still every year we have exploration program that will compensate for every barrel that we produce and every BTU of gas that we also produce or we market today. So if you believe, and that shows our conviction that without exploration today, you have oil production that is sufficient for 60 to 70 years. So if we believe the world will change in the next 5 to 10 years, we don't need to do exploration. You have enough resources today without doing any dollar on exploration. But our conviction is that transition takes decades. For India, for example, you asked about India transition. India, the issue of affordability is very important. Look at a car like Maruti Suzuki today. It's what, 3.5 to 5 lakhs? But Nissan Leaf is 45 to 50 lakhs. So basically 10 times more. That's one element. Look at, for example, firewood used in the rural area. Today, it's more than 60%. Today, firewood. Transition takes time. We're talking about wood, going to coal, to oil. Coal today in the India is almost in the power generation, 70% in the power generation. And this is something that's supposed to have peaked 50 years ago. My point is, even if you look at 2040 for the Indian market, in terms of the energy sector, the coal as part of the energy mix will almost be the same. But in absolute terms, it's going to be much higher. This is coal. Biomass or firewood in the rural area, for the last 2 decades, this is based on the latest report I read, only reduced by 12%. So it takes time for transition to happen. I think with more use of coal in the power sector, use of carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration is important for the Indian market. And I think these are areas where it can be looked at. There's a lot of success in moving from kerosene to LPG. We've seen it in India, it's happening. So a lot of transition happening in that area. So these are all success factors that is happening in the Indian market. So my point is transition is taking place. However, it's going to be decades before that full translation. Oil to chemical is something big. When we talk about oil to chemical, it is an area where we have a lot of resources and emphasis on it. And it is something maybe we'll talk about in the...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Nasir. Let me invite Mr. Singh to build upon this. Would be good to hear your views on the energy transition, and more importantly, what opportunities does it create for collaboration?
First of all, if you ask any oil and gas man that how does he look at the future for energy basket, I think we all are going to say that oil is going to remain. This we say based on a lot of strong fundamentals and considering all the likely changes which might happen. Now we strongly believe that energy, if you look at the complete energy basket, it remains on 4 pillars, which is energy access, energy efficiency, energy sustainability, and energy security. Now for different countries, the importance of each pillar might be slightly different. Like for a country like India, which heavily depends on import of energy, probably the energy security plays a much more important role rather than any other country which might be self-sufficient in energy. But nevertheless, these four things will remain, probably will be guiding the whole energy scene, either today or tomorrow. As Mr. Amin was also saying, that transition is a phase. It's not a deadline. It's not that beyond this something else will start happening. But transition is a phase. And probably it will be more driven by factors which are not only linked with the energy supplies or energy access. For example, in future, the issues like environment, they might be the governing force towards such transition. If we talk about India, considering our commitment towards environment, considering our commitment towards Paris Agreement, there had been major recent shifts which we have witnessed and which probably also impact the transition phase. For example, moving towards Euro 6 within a span of 3 years, it has given a lot of growth in the refining industry, a lot of development in the Indian refining, a lot of new technologies being adopted, a lot of indigenous technologies developed and adopted to achieve Euro 6 timeline. Nowhere in the world countries have switched from Euro 4 to Euro 6 in a span of 3 years. It's not only what we are doing, it's probably the more important thing is that we know that we can do this. And there is a lot of background or a lot of background work which is required to achieve this. Similarly, Samin was also mentioning about the biofuel usage or the wood being used as cooking fuel or the domestic fuel for the cooking purpose. Today, India's domestic LPG penetration is more than 90%, I think close to 91 plus percent. Out of 270 households, more than 91% today have access to LPG. That does not mean that everyone is cooking today on LPG. We have provided access to LPG to these people, but affordability still remains an issue. But having provided the access, probably affordability can also be taken care by different means. So these are all probably part of strong transition phases. Now, in my opinion, especially for India or otherwise also, I see two major things which are likely to impact the future energy consumption pattern. Number one is renewables. India is a large player. India is strongly committed. But the people will not only move towards renewable only because they have to use renewable. It has to be commercially competitive. Now, don't think that even if we take example of EVs, number one, it's probably not very fair to compare EV with IC engine alone because we have to see the complete life cycle. We have to start from generation of electricity up to the driving the car. So if you consider that, any option which the public will choose or the customer will choose has to be economically attractive. So renewables offers a tremendous opportunity. They will definitely come. They will increase their percentage also, but they have to be competitive at all times. What we are seeing few forms of energies today. New forms will come. If you talk about hydrogen fuel cell, probably it will again disrupt EV itself. So this is one thing. Second very strong area in my opinion is bioenergy, particularly for countries like India where we have a lot of access, a lot of biofeedstock which can be converted into energy. We are working tremendously towards 2G ethanol, 3G ethanol kind of projects at commercial level, as well as biogas, which again provides tremendous opportunity within the country. So I think now again, it's a transition because we need technologies which make these initiatives competitive at all times. And then we need some policy support, little hand-holding during the initial phase. But I think these two important things, initiatives or the forms of energy, will going to play an important role in future.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Albanian, let me invite you on a different theme. Would be great to hear your views on India as an investment destination. I think you talked about it. But more importantly, what can help more investments come into India from the businesses in Kingdom?
You know, if you look at, maybe I can start with SABIC. We've been in India more than 3 decades, and we have more than 1.5 billion US dollars revenue of sales, we have certain product, even we have reached 50% of the Indian market share. But have we achieved our target? Unfortunately, not yet, because we feel that there is more need to be done in order for us to expand our presence and our business. We are very excited about some of the new regulation that India's governments have already done. The GST, also ease of doing business index, there is a major improvements. These are very good opportunities, shows how the governments of his Prime Minister Modi are serious about opening up the environment and investment for foreign investors. And I think will encourage SABIC and others, especially from KSA, to come and do more. In the same time, we should leverage this environments not only for Saudi investors, but also for the Indian investors. We have here, for example, is the head of His Excellency, the head of SAGIA. What keeps him awake at night? How can he improve the environments and business, easy business in the kingdom? So we need to do more in order for us to leverage both. Yes, there are good progress, there are good steps have been taken, but I think the potential, it's way more than what we have seen it today. We are both nations, are G20 members. We have a very strong economy. We have a potential growth, and I think we should leverage this. Especially in the area of technology, I think this is an area it has to come into a very at least minimum level of realizations. Of course, energy and chemicals specifically, India has a huge demand. I think at this point we don't really leverage it. In the same times, talent, an exchange of talent and skilled talent, especially with the growth project that we are doing in the kingdom, I think this is an opportunities for us to leverage it. So both nations has potential, but they still need some more work from a regulations point of view in order for them to attract more. But I'm confident with what I have seen, at least for the last 3 years in India, there is a good start. In the same times, we experience in the kingdom a major transformation driven by our 2030 vision, where we're going to do more. Keep in mind, KSA will host also the G20, and we already started preparing for it, and I think this is going to give the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia a more attractive environment for Indian investors. And I hope in 2 years from today, we could see really a major leap improvement on the trade between both nations.
Thank you, Mr. Alban. Let me invite Mr. Premji and to comment on this. Mr. Premji, you mentioned that you have gone through the Vision 2030. How do you see opportunities for companies, especially from the services domain in India, to partner in this journey?
Just let us define services first. I would call services IT services, R&D services, healthcare services, logistics services, financial services, sports services, etc. Where I think India stands uniquely competent, including the fact that it has had so much experience with a very large base of consumption, is in IT services, in education services, and probably in health services. You just look at the facts. Something like 10% of the total doctor population in the United States in the best hospitals are Indians. More than 15% of the best professors in American universities, in engineering colleges, are Indian origin. So evidently, there is a standard of excellence available from within the countries themselves in a highly competitive environment like the United States. I think a third area where we could be very useful to work with